The mission of the National Kidney Foundation of Illinois is to improve the health and well-being of people at risk for or affected by kidney disease through prevention, education, and empowerment. Today's event is one of our signature educational programs held annually in Chicago and Central Illinois in English and in Spanish, and we hope that everyone will learn a lot today. And now I'd like to take a minute to recognize our sponsors for their generous support of today's program. Please be sure to stop by their tables at some point today. They do have essential resources and information to share with you. And so I'd like to thank Baxter, DaVita Kidney Care, Fresenius Kidney Care, Northwestern Medicine, and UI Health. And I'd also like to thank our respected planning committee members. Their dedication to this cause is the reason we are able to put on this event each year. So thank you to Samantha Mock and David Dreyfus from UI Health, John Valencia from Rush, Deborah Owen and Dr. Amishi Desai from Loyola, Douglas Penrod, Sharita Holman, and Shamir Harrington from Northwestern, Claire McGivern and Nisa Torres from University of Chicago. And then just a few more housekeeping notes before we begin. You can find the restrooms next to the registration area. We'll have lunch available at 1 p.m. And at the end of the program, can you please return your surveys? We really value your opinions and your feedback because it helps us make the programs better. And now I'd like to welcome our MC for the day, Mr. Mateo Rueda, our programs associate at the NKFI, and to also give Mateo a thank you for all of his work to make sure that today happens.
So yeah, thanks everyone for being here. Everyone should have received an orange bag. And if you look inside, you will find the agenda for today and can be used as your guide throughout today's program. There's also, again, like Rachel said, a survey for you to complete and submit to voice your opinion on our program. The surveys are really important to us and we do really read through them and we value your thoughts. So please make sure to fill out your surveys at the end of the program and drop them off at the registration table, please. If we take a look at the agenda, the first presentation is from Alyson Haebig, who will discuss on a topic titled Nutrition is a Marathon, Not a Sprint, How to Nourish Your Body Intuitively with Chronic Kidney Disease. Ali Haebig graduated with her master's in nutrition science from the University of Illinois at Chicago in 2017, and since then has worked as a registered dietitian in the Chicago area. Ali is the owner and founder of Empower and Nourish, a private practice dedicated to helping clients develop a healthy and sustainable relationship with food, focused on with food using a non-diet approach. So please welcome Ali Haebig.
I landed on the title Nutrition is a Marathon, Not a Sprint, because despite the urgent messages around nutrition we receive from the media, like cut this out or lose weight fast or this is unhealthy, our bodies actually care way more about trends over months and years rather than a specific date, meal, or food. And so while we get the messages to sprint towards better health, we can actually maintain our well-being, quality of life, and sanity more when we consider the bigger picture or the marathon. So before we get into all of that though, a little more about me and the work I do. So as mentioned earlier, I am a registered dietitian nutritionist in Chicago, and I specialize in using a non-diet approach. And so what does that even mean? Well, it means when clients come to see me, instead of using a restrictive meal plan, talking about good or bad foods, and doing weigh-ins, we talk about the factors that impact how we relate to food and how these things get in the way of achieving nutrition goals. And these factors include everything from barriers such as time, effort, and money to emotional and mental barriers as well. And when these factors are considered, it leads to a more sustainable relationship with food than when a client leaves my virtual office, they can take with them for the rest of their life. And so the main keys to a non-diet approach are exactly what I'm here to speak to you about today: intuitive eating and health at every size. And so I wanted to prepare for our marathon by laying out a little bit of a roadmap for this presentation. And so the majority of today's presentation is going to be a crash course, and an emphasis on crash. This is a big, big topic that I could take many, many hours to present on. So it's a crash course on intuitive eating and health at every size. And we'll first discuss what is intuitive eating, and then move on to a common question I receive: how can I be healthy at my current size? Which talks about health at every size. Later, we'll get to how these approaches can be used when treating chronic kidney disease. And then finally, we'll wrap things up and have a short Q&A So please feel free to jot down any questions you might have during the presentation to save them for the end. All right, so what is intuitive eating? Can I get a quick show of hands if anyone has heard of intuitive eating before? Raise your hand. Intuitive eating, if you've heard of that before. No? All right, cool. So over the next few slides, I'm gonna attempt to give you the best description of intuitive eating possible. It's a very hard thing to sum up, but I'm gonna give it my best shot. First off, I wanted to address a very common misconception about intuitive eating, that it involves eating whatever you want, whenever you want. While intuitive eating does include unconditional permission to eat, the reality is a lot more nuanced. Instead of a mindless free-for-all, intuitive eating actually promotes a mindful approach to nourishing your body by listening to your bodily cues. We'll get to those cues later, but suffice it to say, there have been more than 125 studies on intuitive eating to date, with more that are currently underway. And these studies have shown that intuitive eaters have lower triglyceride levels, lower levels of emotional eating, loss of control eating, binge eating, lower blood pressure, and also lower body dissatisfaction. But all this begs the question, why? Why would we want to learn about intuitive eating? To preface this slide, I like to say that I am a big fan of using metaphors in my practice and in my work with my clients. So I find that the pendulum is a really great one to describe why someone would want to eat intuitively. And so the thing about pendulums is that when we pull back the string on the end of a pendulum, it swings to the other side with equal force, and then swings back, and so on and so forth. So if we think about someone in what I'll call the diet mindset, meaning that they're on a literal diet or they're avoiding or restricting certain foods, to our bodies, that's the equivalent of pulling back this pendulum ball. And our bodies don't really like restrictions. We don't like being told what to do, especially when it comes to something as essential as food. Our bodies perceive it as the beginning of starvation and want to avoid this at all costs. So during this time of restriction, the body starts to become on high alert for food. And this makes sense because our brain, thinking it's heading into starvation, wants to take any opportunity to eat more while it can. But to the person who's dieting or restricting, this is torture. They may find themselves thinking about food more than ever, having greater hunger pains and higher cravings. And then at some point, the pendulum has to swing the other way to what I call the what the heck mindset. This is the point where our body gets what it wants and we finally allow ourselves to eat in preparation for starvation. But the way we perceive this is we feel out of control. We feel like we let go. Some people might call this a cheat day. When in reality, it's only in response to the restriction, the idea that starvation is coming and we have to be ready. So what ends up happening in the aftermath is people believe it's their fault. They just didn't do a good enough job. They need to try again. And then the pendulum gets pulled back that one more time for another cycle. So this pendulum response is a direct result of our body's will to live, not a weakness, not a lack of willpower, a physiological drive to survive. So how do we avoid this pendulum pitfalls? Well, when we can start the process of eating more in line with what our bodies want and need, we begin to fall into this middle ground, a place of stillness in the middle. And in this place, we come to know that no food is inherently good or bad, that all foods can fit into our lifestyle, and we become better and better at listening to our bodies. And this is actually where our bodies love to be. As I mentioned earlier, that intuitive eaters have lower triglycerides, emotional eating, all that stuff. All of this is a direct result of being in this middle place. Our bodies hate the chaos of being restricted and then kind of being pulled to the other side of the pendulum. Just like most of us, they love stability and security, and intuitive eating can help us get there. Okay, so now we know a little bit more about the why of intuitive eating. It's time to get more into the what. The practice of intuitive eating is based on 10 principles, all of which are presented here. And they're more thoroughly presented in the book, which I'll bring up at the end of the presentation. And we won't have time to delve into every one of these principles in this presentation. Each one could easily be their own presentation, but it wouldn't be a presentation on intuitive eating if I didn't mention them. So I'll just run down the list and name the 10 principles of intuitive eating. 1 is reject the diet mentality. 2, honor your hunger. 3, make peace with food. 4, challenge the food police. 5, discover the satisfaction factor. 6, feel your fullness. 7, cope with your emotions with kindness. 8, respect your body. 9, movement, feel the difference. And 10, honor your hunger with gentle nutrition. But more than the principles themselves, I want to explain what intuitive eating is through stick figures. Very sophisticated, I know. So first, here we are as our younger self, right? We are actually all born with the ability to eat intuitively. It's what our bodies are built to do. Babies cry when they're hungry, and they stop eating when they're full. There is a direct line of communication between the brain and the tummy, and this can be the case for quite some time. Unfortunately, however, as we get a little older and are able to interact more with the world, we start to pick up on some external messages, such as, don't eat so much candy, or watch your weight. Should you really be eating that? Or being told that there are good foods and bad foods. That's when we start to question our brain-stomach connection. Because of these messages, we start to believe that we can't trust our bodies and instead must rely on a set of rules or diet to eat well. This ends up blocking sometimes that line of communication and frankly ends up making us feel a little anxious. And so intuitive eating is a reminder that our bodies actually know what we need more than any calculator or tracking app. We just have to rebuild that line of communication and listen again. So how do we stay connected to our bodies? How do we maintain that connection? Well, first, we can think about how we get back in touch with the signals our body sends us daily. Like right now, can you sense your heart rate? I know I can, being a presenter. We can sense our heart rate in our body in different places at any given moment, right? We can also feel the urge to sit up and stretch when we've been sitting for a long time, how we know when it's time to use the bathroom or drink water or take a deep breath, how we feel our emotions and where we feel those emotions in our bodies. We can relearn to listen to our bodies and acknowledge the inherent wisdom of it. There's a fancy term for this called interoceptive awareness, but we can think of it as just being mindful of how our body feels. So we listen to our bodies, but how does that help us eat healthier? Well, enter the intuitive eating tool called the Hunger Fullness Scale. So this is a scale from 0 to 10, ranking how hungry or full we are. Right now, because I had breakfast a few hours ago at this point, I'd say I'm at like a 4 or 5. I'm aiming towards neutral, but I guarantee you in an hour, I'll probably say I feel more like a 3. I'll be getting to the hungry stage. And in the beginning stages of intuitive eating, I ask my clients to track their hunger and fullness levels throughout the day instead of food. And what they find is almost universal. When we become overly hungry, so to that 0 or 1 level, we are programmed to crave the most energy-dense foods. So energy-dense meaning most calories, right? And calories do equal energy. And so when we crave those foods, it means that our bodies often need a lot of energy all at once. And so it makes sense, right? If we're really hungry, the body's really smart. It wants to have all that energy right away. This is why if you've ever felt painfully hungry, the last thing you often want is a plate of vegetables. Never in my life have I been really hungry and then was like, I just really could go for some broccoli right now. Our bodies are smart, like I said. They want to get the most bang for our buck when we're really, really at that level of hunger. And so they're gonna want that pizza or the burger or things like that. And as we learn to listen to our hunger and fullness cues, we can learn to respond to our hunger in the more earlier stages, right? That's represented in the green kind of circles on the slide, right? The 3, even like the 2 a little bit is in the yellow zone, which will then allow us to be in the right frame of mind to make the choices we want to be able to make. Just think about if you've ever tried to cook when you're hungry. It's almost always a really bad idea, right? You can barely get through it without being really irritated or really, grabbing something else to snack on. Our bodies like to be in that comfortable level of hunger in order to make those decisions we want to be able to make with food. So of course, there's more to eating than just feelings of hunger and fullness. We also have to consider how satisfying a meal is, and with this comes the importance of mindfulness. And most of us know what mindful eating looks like, right? We might imagine a monk eating a bowl of rice in a temple or somewhere and savoring every bite. But that sounds a little unrealistic to me. We hear about mindful eating, and at least I get frustrated because we don't do it that way, right? We've got jobs, we've got stress, we've got people to feed and take care of, and more. So rather than telling my clients what to do, because chances are they already know, I ask what gets in the way. What barriers pop up? What prevents us from being able to take a minute or two to appreciate our food? And the most common barriers that come up are time, energy, effort, support, and stress. So instead of continuing to bang our heads against the wall of like, oh, you just need to mindful eat more, right? We talk about like what gets in the way, what is going to help give you more energy, or maybe make meals a little easier for you, right? Whether that looks like asking for help from others, relying on foods that are a little simpler to prepare, and addressing any mental health or self-care needs. Very often, we expect our bodies to perform very well with very little care and self-compassion. When we start meeting not just our physical needs, but also our emotional and mental health needs, that's when we can have the capacity to meet our nutrition goals in the way that we want. All right, so right now you might be thinking, all right, so that's intuitive eating. But what the heck were you saying earlier about being able to be healthy at my current size? How does that even work? Well, remember the pendulum and the sophisticated stick figures? Well, here's the deal. When we eat intuitively, when we find that middle place and keep our line of communication between our brain and our stomach open, our bodies naturally want to settle into a weight that feels comfortable to them based on our unique genetic blueprints. And for most of us, that is actually not going to be our smallest size. And why would it be? Our bodies don't want to be at a size where they are just barely surviving, right? They want to thrive, and that looks different for everyone. So the truth is we can pursue health at any size, meaning that our body, weight, shape, or size does not automatically mean we are unhealthy. While there is a correlation between weight and negative health outcomes, that does not mean that living in a larger body makes somebody unhealthy. There are many other factors that influence our health that weight doesn't capture. So what impacts our health? And so often we get the message that our health is the product of what we eat and how much we move our bodies. But it's actually a lot more complicated than that. The social determinants of health show the factors that influence our health that we might not think about. Factors such as economic stability, access to healthcare, the neighborhoods we live in, and so on. And then when you take into consideration our genetics and our mental health, that looks like a lengthy list of factors we can't always control very easily. In fact, the only category that gets much attention is the individual health behaviors category, which if you look at this as like a pie, it's such a very small wedge, and yet it's given so much attention. And why does this matter? Understanding that our health is a lot more complex than just our weight is a helpful reminder that we will not be able to control every aspect of our well-being, and more importantly, that is not our fault. The Health at Every Size approach states that any size body can improve their health through first understanding all the factors that are impacting our health, and second, focusing on changing behaviors, not necessarily the numbers on a scale. So your weight does not equal your health. A Health at Every Size approach focuses on changing behaviors, and weight is not a behavior. And by that I mean we can't wake up and decide to be in a smaller body that day. We have to live in our current bodies, and those bodies deserve to be cared for as they are, no matter what changes lie ahead in the future. Research on Health at Every Size, the Health at Every Size approach also consistently shows better health outcomes when quality of life and sustainability are emphasized over chasing perfection. And lastly, we live in a culture that continues to uphold harmful stereotypes about people in larger bodies. The shame and anxiety that result from that are intertwined with physical health outcomes. A compassionate Health at Every Size approach helps to create a safe environment for all size bodies to explore pursuing health. This might seem obvious, but also body diversity is kind of a fact of nature, right? If there was a study that put a bunch of different people in a room, locked them in there for 50 years and fed them all the same foods, those people would still have different sized bodies at the end of that 50 years. And such a study would be very unethical, but it demonstrates the point that our bodies, like other species in nature, are meant to be different. And while our culture, through unjust stereotypes and biased assumptions, has made that undesirable, I wonder how different things would be if we saw ourselves the way we look at a forest of trees or different dogs. We would never expect a pit bull to weigh the same as a toy poodle, so why do we feel that way about ourselves? One thing remains clear: no matter our body size, all bodies are deserving of compassionate care. But what about my chronic kidney disease? You might be thinking. Doesn't having a chronic illness mean I can't eat intuitively or not focus on numbers? I'm here to say that an intuitive eating and health at every size approach is for everyone, and of course I'm happy to explain. First, intuitive eating and health at every size involves looking at you as a whole person, including your social activity, your sleep, movement, etc. You are not just a page of numbers. And these things do impact our health and those pesky numbers in big ways. Consider if you're not able to get enough sleep consistently. We know that lack of sleep often leads to increased stress and makes us end up feeling hungry more throughout the day, putting you at risk for being in that overly hungry state we talked about earlier. So by figuring out what we can do to help your sleep, we're decreasing that factor from impacting your food choices. I often joke with my clients that it's very normal for us to go through a whole session and barely talk about food. For this very reason, we all know what to do, but the better question is what gets in the way? Second, the research around intuitive eating has found that pursuing health behavior goals versus chasing perfect numbers leads to the most sustainable health outcomes. And while my specialty is not chronic kidney disease, when I have worked with clients who had goals around maintaining better blood sugar levels or lowering cholesterol, focusing on small, sustainable behavior changes almost always led to them achieving that goal. And better yet, it was always things that they wanted to keep doing by themselves. And third, the intuitive eating principle of gentle nutrition, that was number 10, if you remember, involves making decisions based not only on what feels good for our body, but also what will help our body function well. An example is when we find out we might be low in one nutrient. Say your doctor wants you to eat more fiber. We might think about ways we could sustainably include more fiber in your day based on what you're currently able to do. So that could mean, sprinkling some ground flax on your cereal or buying a higher fiber cracker or taking a supplement for the time being. As I've mentioned throughout this presentation, the research has shown that adopting intuitive eating and health at every size has led to decreased risk of type 2 diabetes, risk of heart disease, cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugars, and sedentary behavior, and increased quality of life, fruit and vegetable intake, diet diversity, body image, physical activity, and more. Focusing on our body's cues, the barriers we encounter, and the factors that impact our health set us up for having a sustainable relationship with food that will lead to these benefits not just in the short term, but in the years to come. And as we approach the finish line of our marathon this morning, I want to take a moment to say something I very often say to my clients, that any given moment, we are doing the best we can with what we have. Our health can be scary. Not always knowing what could happen is terrifying. And it makes sense that we often want quick results. We reach for perfection because it feels the safest. Numbers feel tangible. We want to sprint. But we also forget that how we live today in this moment matters. We forget that our bodies are imperfect. They often make mistakes despite our best efforts, and really, that is really frustrating when they do. But when we focus on the bigger picture, the marathon, we can remember that our lives are more than numbers, and our bodies always deserving of compassionate care. I somehow seem to talk a lot and also not enough in this presentation, so I've highlighted several resources I really recommend if you want to learn more about intuitive eating and health at every size and you're new to it, including a book called Just Eat It, Anti-Diet, Intuitive Eating, which is the original book that kind of that details intuitive eating approach. The book Health at Every Size, as well as Body Respect, and The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. All of these are wonderful, wonderful resources to learn more about this approach and go into more detail than I could go into today. All right, and that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to take some questions at this time. Feel free if you have any questions to raise. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So, relative to intuitive eating, would you say it's also better? But last year I've been trying to keep a log of what I eat, even when I run off the rails. Like if I have half a bag of Swedish fish or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
at least I can see from there, on what day I made a mistake, because it's tied to that also. And I know it's tough for everyone to do every day, but somehow learn being on dialysis, you gotta weigh yourself every day
Yeah.
to get your dry weight. Can everybody hear me?
I've got the mic.
My apologies, I could just talk on and on. So my question was relative to tracking what you're eating per day, measured by your weight. And again, people who are on dialysis understand you have to, at the beginning of the morning, you have to know what your dry weight is. So you should not have had anything edible. But is that also something that could be quantitative to intuitive eating for, somebody who measures and measures honestly what they're eating? Like even like you said, everybody goes off the rails at some point, or a cheat day, if you will,
Right.
or a reward day. So
Yeah.
would you say that would be something, somebody tracking consistently what they do even when they're made some mistakes?
Yeah. I think what I love, tracking, because absolutely, sometimes we do have to be really meticulous about tracking certain parts of our health and well-being, especially when it comes to chronic kidney disease or chronic illness in general. I think that when it comes to tracking, what I love to do with my clients is, in the tracking, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like you mentioned the Swedish fish. I would be curious, like, what led to that happening, right? Were you feeling really, really hungry? Was that something that you hadn't allowed yourself to have in a really long time, and then it just happened? I would be curious about that, and that could also help us maybe, allow you to have like 1 or 2 Swedish fish or something like that, like on a more consistent basis, so that you didn't feel compelled to have that whole bag or half bag all at once. So yeah, I think when numbers do have to be considered, I like to try to neutralize those and know that very rarely is there like an urgent, oh my gosh, we have to, unless it's like an emergency room kind of number. Very, very rarely is that like an emergent number. We can take our time, understand it a little more, know that we didn't do anything on purpose or wrong. And yeah, I think intuitive eating can help a lot with that. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I asked that question specifically for people who are on dialysis, because anybody who has been on dialysis or is currently on dialysis knows you can have a 5 to 6 pound fluctuation per day, and you've actually done nothing wrong. You could even have a day where you haven't eaten anything, and because of the water weight gain or excess fluids, if you will, it can look like you've been a bad person, where in actuality, you've done everything right. As you said, the physicality of the beautiful thing we call the human body can be a disruptor and say, well, you sat for 6 hours, the 4 you were in the dialysis chair, and you sat and were sedentary. So that water or the fluid came down as edema, and it added some extra weight for the day or for the week, if you will.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, that was a really good question. Thank you for clarifying that. And I think something I wasn't able to dive into too much in the presentation is that also a big part of the Health at Every Size and intuitive eating work that I do, but I know other practitioners do as well, is prioritizing your lived experience in your body, right? And so thinking about how your body's feeling, what your body's having to go through every day, and taking that and using that on the same level as like my nutrition expertise, right? And so that matters greatly. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
I've been a diabetic now for 20 years. A dietitian once told me, I don't know if she was wise or not, she told me that if there is a piece of chocolate cake in front of you and you're absolutely wanting to eat the chocolate cake and you resist the chocolate cake, you resist the temptation, your blood sugar will probably rise as much or even more than if you had actually eaten a small piece of that cake.
Ah, yeah, interesting.
So,
yeah.
I don't know whether what she said was right or wrong, but I've been following her advice and I've been like, I just take a little tiny sliver of the cake and I feel satisfied and my blood sugar hasn't gone that much overboard.
Yeah, no, I think that's really smart. And while I don't specialize in diabetes in particular, that would definitely make sense to me that our bodies are that smart that they would almost anticipate that rise in blood sugar and release the insulin as a result. So yeah, that makes sense. And I think that also speaks to, when I've worked with folks who do have diabetes, when we do allow ourselves to have foods that are really satisfying to us, whether it's chocolate cake or Swedish fish or something else, like more consistently, it actually does lead to more manageable blood sugar numbers, in particular in the case of diabetes. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Other questions?
Trying to speak through my mask. We still have time for a few more questions, so if anyone likes to.
I actually have a comment.
Yeah.
About a year ago, I'm post-transplant, about 6 years. About a year ago, I had gone to see my follow-up with my endocrinologist for my diabetes. Mm-hmm. What I was doing at that point was I've tried my best to stay away from medication for diabetes because I'm post-transplant diabetic. There was no diabetes before that.
Sure.
So I was trying my best to beat diabetes, and the way I was trying to beat diabetes was to eat less or eat the right things only, like eat only eggs, no rice, no wheat, any of those, or maybe half a portion of what I would normally, my hunger would require.
Right.
The result of that was I started to lose weight dramatically. Didn't lose a lot, but in the end result was I was feeling very tired every day.
Yeah.
Because the nutrition was probably not sufficient. But I was, compensating it by whey protein and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But instead, the endocrinologist said, if that is what you're trying to do, and the numbers didn't change. The morning blood sugars did not change. They were still like 125, 130 fasting. So the endocrinologist said, like, you're struggling too hard. It is okay to take, increase your dose of medication so that you can, feel comfortable about eating what you're hungry for.
Yeah.
So that is the advice, and I followed that for a year now, and things have been good.
That's
actually.
awesome.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm on a higher dose of my medication, but at least I'm able to eat what I like. Not excessively. I'm watching what I eat, but that's how it has worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that there's sometimes a lot of stigma around using medication and increasing dosages, but I think sometimes our bodies just aren't, sometimes our bodies are imperfect, right? And so they are, whether we like it or not, they might be at that level or that resting level of fasting blood sugar, no matter what our attempts would be. So yeah, I think what's going to help make the best quality of life and the most sustainable quality of life is a good approach there. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I've been on this, I guess, quest, or whatever you want to call it, because I have to have this surgery, a breast surgery, and the doctor told me that I had to lose 50 pounds, and I had to have a BMI of 35. So far, I've done well. Because I started with a book, and I started on right after Christmas in the new year, and I went into my cabinets, and I threw everything away that I didn't need or junk. I just threw it all away. I went through this just cleaned out my cabinets. And then I began to purchase food that would be more healthy for me and to help me lose weight. Then I was very good at first. Now I've gotten slid into this, I eat what I want, but I don't eat until I get real. I used to eat everything on my plate.
Yeah.
Now I don't eat everything on my plate. I might fill my plate up, but as I'm eating, if I start feeling full, then I start saying to myself, okay, it's time to back up off the plate.
Yeah.
And it's working for me because so far I've lost 33 pounds. Of course, I am stepping up because I'm in a wheelchair. I am stepping up on my exercise. So I've been taking physical therapy for an hour, and then along with that, I go to the park and I do water aerobics.
Yeah.
So I figured once I got my body moving, that would really help me to lose the weight, and it has.
Yeah.
So far I've lost 33 pounds, but now I'm at a standstill. And I got 17 more pounds to lose.
Yeah.
So because I was way over 200. Now I'm coming in close to 200. So I want to get under 200. But I'm at a standstill now, and I'm exercising, and I just don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really understandable. And I think about the whole approach that you're taking, right? Like, and I think, very often those very restrictive moments, like, can only be short-lived, right? Our brains don't work well, like I explained earlier. So I appreciate how you're bringing yourself to this middle ground and you're incorporating physical activity. I think having a conversation with your doctor about all the things that you are doing is probably a good idea, just to explain, because sometimes we can't control exactly how many pounds we lose. And sometimes, honestly, it can get to a dangerous situation based on how somebody might choose to try to lose that last 17 pounds. So it might be worth a conversation with your doctor to kind of explore, like, if this is what you're seeing and this is all that you're doing, and, what else could there be to do to help, you get to the place where you could have that surgery. And if this might be an okay spot, that might be, I think that's worth a conversation for sure. Yeah.
All right, I think we might have time for one final question if anyone would like to ask at this point. Anyone with one final question? Great.
Hi. So my mom she's had diabetes since about 9 years now. And before that, my granddad had diabetes for about 10 years too. And like his whole side of the family is pretty much they have diabetes or kidney failure and things like that. So it almost seems like it's like genetic. I'm only 22 and I have a skin condition that kind of does not allow me to like go to the gym and exercise.
Sure.
I have like hidradenitis suppurativa and it flares up when I sweat in any place that I sweat, and it's chronic pain.
Yeah.
So I try to, balance my diet as I go, just because with it being a genetic thing, or what it seems like to be a genetic thing, I try to like eat healthy, knowing that I can't exercise as much as I would like to.
Sure.
But there are times, like I said, I'm younger and I am in college, and there's days where I don't eat at all and things like that. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, like, what do you recommend as far as like diet-wise for somebody like me that's kind of trying to prevent it early on and kind of keep my body weight down and stay healthy. Like I understand like the whole balanced diet thing. I try to make sure that I incorporate my protein and my starch and everything like that, but sometimes it gets away from me, like I said. So
Right. Yeah.
what like advice do you have for like somebody like me?
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you for asking. I think that's a very common issue. And yeah, I think we can only do so much sometimes. And that's why I love this approach, because it doesn't take that blaming or shaming kind of approach that I think we can sometimes get from our culture of like, shame on you if you get this disease. But it's a lot more than that, right? And so I think focusing on what you can do to kind of keep up that consistency of the things that you're already very aware of, right? Like the balance plate, like what gets in the way on the days where that gets away from you, right? Like, is there a way to kind of do the best you can on those days? But I think the more we can lean into, trying to find this moderate ground that fits with our lifestyle the best we can, while also keeping in mind, there's nothing wrong with being like, oh, I'm noticing this about my diet, or I'm noticing that I'm not able to get to the gym and do the things. Like what other things could I maybe do? Not in a like I should be doing this all the time way, but like what would it be like to do like 10 minutes at home, or like to kind of try this on my plate today, right? So I think anything that helps increase that consistency is key. And I think knowing that when something is very genetic, sometimes there's not a ton we can do, right? And I think the beautiful thing about the world we live in now is that there are so many ways to effectively manage conditions, right? And so even if we do, we're all going to get something, right? Like sometimes we don't get to pick what we get. And so instead of kind of saying like, I did this to myself, we can say like, how can I best manage this and treat my body with kindness and care? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been great talking with you guys today.